Somehow it got even worse than Justin Fox and his lack of understanding for DEI. Let's move on to Nathan Kavanaugh, because what he was taking part in was even more illegal.
So earlier we talked about some of your communications with Mr. Davis, including, in the context of you emailing yourself, I think you were saying, and then using that email on Signal to send to Mr. Davis. Do you remember talking about that with Mr. Robinson earlier?
I do.
Okay. Walk me through that process exactly.
There was a weekly scorecard, as it was called, where we reported on savings across each agency. It was black text in an Excel spreadsheet file. That was downloaded. Steve preferred that to be sent over Signal. Signal is not on a government device, so we downloaded it and sent it to Steve on Signal. Okay. That was the extent of.
So Mr. Davis was not on a government device?
I don't know if he was on a government device or not. I know he preferred to receive the scorecard on Signal.
Steve Davis, Elon Musk's right-hand man who was put in charge of this whole DOGE thing on the ground, even though Elon Musk's name was attached to it above hand. That is before Musk was in, the White House standing next to Donald Trump with his stupid hat on every day and sunglasses dictating what Trump should be doing. What we didn't know is that Steve Davis, who had been working with Musk, I believe when he was a part of taking over Twitter and all these other things, was put in charge. And he was apparently the overseer that told Nathan Kavanaugh, again, I'm going to be your excuse as to reasons why you can later, if we ever get busted, say, I was just following orders. And the orders that he was following had to do with stealing information, uploading it to, again, that Signal chat. We've heard about that when it comes to the way Pete Hegseth and the military was sharing classified information, again, via a Signal chat. PBS talked about what it is that was going on, though, in better detail than I could tell you.
The Social Security Administration now says members of Elon Musk's DOGE team working at the agency last year accessed and shared sensitive data. In a court filing earlier this month, the Trump administration amended what it had previously disclosed, writing that one DOGE employee at SSA signed an agreement with an unnamed political advocacy group to analyze voter rolls to, quote, find evidence of voter fraud and to overturn election results in certain states. In another instance, a DOGE member shared personally identifiable information of 1,000 people in an encrypted email attachment, though the government says they aren't sure what specifically was shared or whether it was accessed. And SSA also said DOGE shared data on third-party cloud servers that are, quote, outside SSA's security protocols, so the agency doesn't know what information was shared or if it still exists on the server.
As they shared all of our personal information to who knows, and also to what kind of unsecured locations or anyone else that they didn't even mean to share it with happened, we're just supposed to move on and be like, waste, fraud, and abuse, waste, fraud, and abuse. You notice every time these politicians that were covering for this, talking about waste, fraud, and abuse, every time it was to cover up for these illegal activities. So how much of our Social Security information, personal information, parental information, home information, living information, employee information, everything about you based off of your Social Security number has now been given to these fucking idiots like these guys who have no idea what they're talking about except to say, I was just following orders.
Why did you email something to yourself first before sending it to Mr. Davis?
There was no other way to get the scorecard that we generated to Steve on Signal.
Okay. You couldn't go directly from your government email to Signal?
Correct.
Why not?
I don't think GSA allowed the downloading of Signal, among many other apps.
Okay. So GSA didn't allow the downloading of Signal? Is that what you're saying?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. But you then sidestep that by sending documents to your personal phone so that you could then use Signal?
For the weekly scorecard, that was the process, yes.
And that didn't set any alarms about whether or not you should be using Signal to do government work? The fact that GSA didn't let you use Signal on your phone?
GSA didn't let you use a myriad of softwares that would have been common in a standard business. And so I don't know if Signal is representative of, I don't think Signal is a unique case, frankly. There were dozens of apps that weren't allowed on a government device.
You can tell the Kavanaugh here is trying to avoid answering the question about, which would show that he knew the reasons why, as he's putting things on his cell phone, then onto Signal, and maybe thumb drives to then access information to some other overlord above him, that he knew it was wrong. He's trying to cover his ass. I mean, that's what people do in depositions. But I want to mention something here with this whistleblower. He was on that same PBS story there, which mentioned all this. And he gave very specific instances of what it is that was accessed, the three main things he was concerned about that was accessed and was shared without any of our knowledge.
I'll be honest, I was pretty disappointed. This is a situation where the public loses. My disclosure essentially outlined three concerns that I had. The first was that DOGE employees had inappropriate access to our data. The second was that they violated a temporary restraining order. And that the third was that they had uploaded sensitive Social Security data to a cloud server without adequate security controls. In all three of those instances, the public's data is at risk. So to have validation of those first two concerns is disappointing, especially in light of the fact that these could have been investigated and uncovered months ago.
And we know the reasons why that didn't happen, which I'm also going to get to in better detail. There was a broad general overview that the PBS intro gave there about the things that they were doing, but it got even worse. I dug a little deeper into a breakdown of the Washington Post article that, again, it was referencing the whistleblower that came out last year, and nothing was done for the last 6 to 8 months because they don't want anything done behind it, because this is what they were up to. That former employee of Musk's DOGE reportedly stole Americans' personal data from the U.S. Social Security Administration and stored it then on a thumb drive. That's according to that whistleblower. The former DOGE software engineer told coworkers this is how he went about it. Now he's trying to cover his ass. I'm not sure if this guy was the one or if it was the Kavanaugh guy we've been talking to, because there was multiple unknown anonymous guys. But still, this former DOGE software engineer told coworkers at his new job that he possessed 2 tightly restricted databases of U.S. citizens' information and was planning to use that information at his new company. So not only do you have access to stealing information within our federal government at the behest of Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but then you take it to other private companies that you work at later and brag about it? It continued. That former DOGE employee, whom the Washington Post didn't name, worked at the Social Security Administration just last year. In October, he then left to work at a government contractor, where he told colleagues that he had obtained those 2 databases called Numident and the Master Death File. Okay. So these records are more than 500 million living and dead Americans, including Social Security numbers that they may have had, places and dates of birth, citizenship, race and ethnicity, and parents' names. The man also reportedly claimed that he had previously had unrestricted, quote, God-level access to the Social Security Administration's systems. Imagine if one person stole one other person's Social Security information and used it to rack up some credit cards. Think about the type of legal process they'd have to go through to the conviction and go off to jail for that level of fraud. But just because Elon Musk, a billionaire, decided to do it on a grand scale, why is that okay now? Why aren't there law enforcement officials going after his ass today? These depositions were in January. One last part, because maybe we're not pissed off enough yet about what is that they still have access to. It's the latest case of a suspected breach of Americans' personal data linked to DOGE and its incursion into the SSA. And in January, those 2 members were suspected of accessing and sharing that information. And the last part of this is that they were off limits to them as part of an effort to aid in an advocacy group that intended to overturn election results in certain states. Is overturning election results that Donald Trump lost, or overturning election results for potential future elections that Donald Trump doesn't want to lose, are those things part of waste, fraud, and abuse? Maybe every Republican senator and congressman and governor and whoever else came out backing this should answer the question of, what does this have to do with waste, fraud, and abuse? Because I kept hearing them talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. And we knew every time they talked about it, it was a talking point that was fed to them so they could continue to keep people quiet, or maybe to let us argue over what's really waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm going to give you one more example of why Nathan Kavanaugh knew what he was doing, and even in this deposition, is still trying to cover his ass.
Do you think that there's a reason that the government disallows using certain services on their devices?
I'm not sure.
Okay. You don't think it was because maybe they were concerned about data leaks or sharing information with people that shouldn't be receiving that information?
Objection.
I really don't know.
Okay. You have no idea why they would not allow Signal on government phones?
Objection.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know many government officials use Signal, so I'm not totally sure.
Okay. Do you think maybe it was for the maintenance of records that they don't allow Signal and auto delete app on government phones?
Objection.
Yeah, again, I don't know.
You really don't know?
Objection.
I really don't know.
I'm not sure. I really don't know. I'm not really totally sure. I really don't know. I really don't know. That's the only answers he could give as to the reasons why he might realize or know why Signal chat, which he uploaded from the information he had access to his phone, then on to Signal. This is in January, like I said, after, if he didn't know, after realizing and discovering the story about the Signal chat bust that happened with Pete Hegseth in the military. I feel like he may have had an idea as to why Signal wasn't allowed at this point when he's having these depositions. I feel like he knew. But again, just like the criminals that support this administration, what they know is that no matter what they do, this criminal administration has their back.
Well, speaking to that timeline, Deborah, the court filing was on January 16. There were a number of corrections to the previous testimony from agency officials. What's your understanding of why it took so long for the government to correct those previous testimonies?
Because the government's not telling us the truth. I still don't think we know the full story. The allegations that Mr. Borges raised are quite serious, and he raised them with the federal agency that is responsible, Office of Special Counsel, for investigating his disclosures. And rather than investigating it, they've kicked it to a different agency. In terms of his retaliation claims, they haven't investigated it at all. So we have a situation, in a very real sense, where the fox is guarding the hen house.
So from the Department of Justice to the FBI to any of the law enforcement that's within this criminal administration, their job is no longer to go after criminals. What their job to do is to protect the criminals, the specific criminals in the White House. That's their job. And I think it was clearly stated there. And it was clearly shown by, a few of those criminals that didn't realize they were going to get caught up in this dragnet. And that Elon Musk and Steve Davis, I believe, is the guy that was in charge. They're hanging out with their money and their yachts and their Mar-a-Lago parties, and they're not concerned about these dum-dums anymore. But they're not going to face any consequences. Come on, please. You kidding me?